thank you so much for being here. So as you know, this is the talk from the Syano Musyimi on what do you think consent is, and it's part of a project, Reflect and Respect, which aims to raise awareness on violence against women. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for coming in. I was told in John Sessions' hands, I got into this habit when I started lecturing that I would take my shoes off and feel more comfortable and walk whilst giving talks, but I was told no, I should not do that today while seeing people. Anyway, it's very good to see you guys. It's very good to know that you're interested in the topic. Thank you so much, Caroline. I really like what you guys are doing. It's good to see students taking part in answering some of the bigger questions in society and to feel empowered that we can make a difference together. I think I should tell you a little bit about ThinkSit, just a small introduction, if I may. So we started right after the Brexit referendum. I don't know if many of you heard about it, and we realized that mass information had a huge part to play in our expectations, in our behavior, in our actions. And so we as philosophers, thinking that we're the coolest people. Any philosophers here? Way! Yes! You know, one of the good things about seeing you guys is, unlike in my time, you guys have upped the game in terms of representing philosophers as having a good sense of fashion. You know, that's the one thing our department needed. Anyway, we gave ourselves this burden of saying, well, what do we do? This is information. This is about how people think. This is our stuff as philosophers. And so we created a news filter, which I remember you've seen. We found a way of creating filtering news articles for bias. We had a nice sort of system for investment. We were semi-automated. We had a platform. Truth doesn't drive traffic, so that didn't quite work. But we converted it into courses, one of which you're about to see. And the main aim was to make sure that we who are in the mass information age learn how to think independently. We basically think that we who are citizens of the mass information age, with all the information that we get, we need a different type of education on how to think independently. That's not given in conventional education systems. And we think that philosophy has a huge part to play in this. You're about to see the example of one course on sex and consent. We also wrote one on identity, on the economy, especially when it comes to voting, who to vote for. And our main premise, which philosophers like to give, is that there are no right answers, but you need to, the main part of rational thought is to think in terms of another person, or how they would see things. And always take the middle ground until you have to make a decision. That is evidence of good thinking. Mass information, however, and entertainment, whether it's politics, whether it's entertainment, whether it's pornography, which we're going to talk about next week, perhaps, whatever, the first thing they ask you to do is to take a side. And they sort of charge you with emotions to take that side. And then some rational arguments might come through. And we think that this is danger, and it has led to some big mistakes. It leads to mistakes in an individual level. We make mistakes because we have false expectations about ourselves, how we define happiness, our identities, sex and sexuality, and so on. We make mistakes on a social level. So we think this type of education is very important. The last bit of the plug, I promised Caroline, is for those of you doing philosophy, gosh, the images are a bit green. I give a sort of prelude into why to do philosophy. And when we who do philosophy, we're a bit of a persecuted we tell our friends and our parents are going to do philosophy, and they say, does this book exist? And how are you going to use it, etc. And I sort of write in this book, and I talk a lot about the ThinkSit journey, about why philosophy might not lead to one particular vocation, but it's actually a life skill that helps you get into the world, that you use it in your careers, in your relationships, that helps you become more independent, a better thinker. And I write that in a prelude that sort of should motivate you, and obviously lots of rules about how to write essays, structure, arguments, and so on. And if you want examples of the type of mistakes you make socially, where the evidence of the lack of independent thinking on everything, how we think about religion, how we think about politics, how we think about sexuality, how we think about all these things, there are 33 contradictions which we very willingly accept in our lives, but because of the lack of independent thinking, we sort of live out these contradictions. And a contradiction in action means that you go for something that's meant to make you happy, but it's the very thing that actually causes you to be unhappy. You go for something that's meant to make you wealthy, and it actually causes poverty, etc. And I talk about 33 contradictions. That's enough of the plug. Caroline is gonna. You're too sweet to give me bad eyes, Caroline. So let's move on. Today we're going to talk about sex and consent. First question, people, that this whole talk is based on is, what are your expectations of sex? And I'm going to help you answer this for yourself. By the way, this course is actually designed to be like 2 hours long, and we gave it in certain educational courses and so on. So there's going to be a list of questions. I won't have time for us to pause so that you can think about them now, but please do write them down and take them home. They're questions that might affect your sexual happiness in the future. So, but I will go through them. I'll tell you a little bit about my own story. My first sexual expectations came by Titanic, that gorgeous Kate Winslet. I remember I was about 10 years old when I first watched it, and I remember exactly where I was. My mom was sitting there, my cousin was sitting there, and have we all watched it? Or yes, and you know, she's about to take off her thing, and I'm like, she's not going to take it off, and she does, and my jaw drops, and my mom's like, oh, we're going to see it sometime. And so my idea of sexual happiness at a very young age involved rescuing a girl from some kind of constraint or suppression. For the character in Titanic, Rose, she was in a family where she had to, she didn't even really love the guy she was engaged with, and sex was one of the things she used to sort of, she fell in love with this guy, and that was an expression of love, and one of the ways love was expressed and freedom was through sex. So for me, as a 10-year-old boy, I'm like, sex is one of the ways a girl can tell me that, hey, she's leaving some kind of unhappy life, and I'm the one who's going to rescue her from that, right? Pretty weird, but hey, there you go. That's then so raised in the church. Many people don't actually know that there's a book in the Bible called the Songs of Solomon. That is basically a book on erotica, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? It's in the Bible. And obviously they don't go full out of describing body parts and what they do, etc. So they use images, you breathe like a fawn, or your breasts are like grapes, etc. And they go through all these sorts of images. Peaches, grapes, fawns, those are the main images used. So another part of my expectation growing up is, hey, sex is this playful sort of thing that uses a few props. It's quite slow. They talk a lot to one another, and yeah, there's just lots of fruit involved. Okay. Then, as you would expect for most people in our sort of generation, no, I didn't introduce a knife. Does anyone know what Occam's razor is? Okay, fantastic. So it is, many philosophers will, it's a philosophical tool that's used to, there's this game play in philosophy, which is explain as much of the world as you can with as few maxims as possible. That's basically all philosophy. It's a theoretical game. Do take it seriously, but at the end of the day, we're playing this analytic game. And for me, that's what pornography was when I first encountered it. It was no more background story about liberating someone, no more fruits or whatever. It is just the raw physical stuff, hardly anything else. Now, most porn videos have some sort of intro and context, but that's not what it's about, the raw stuff. So by the time I actually came to sexual age, I should say legal sexual age, the expectation was rescuing some conservative girl in a Gordian dress, making things very, using Occam's razor to make sure it was as simple as possible, using fruits and thorns and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you get the picture. That was my journey of sexual expectation. What that introduction was meant to tell you is that I'm not sure anyone here or anyone else in the world would have been through that journey of expectation, right? It'd be really freaky if you did, but we all have different genders. Right? We all have different sexual expectations. Right? We all have different stories. We all have different experiences. We all watch different stuff. Maybe, you know, rescuing a conservative girl from, you know, some life she didn't want. Maybe there's something in me that's a little bit, I don't know. I like to be the freedom fighter or something. I don't know. We all have other different dispositions. Sex means something different to each of us, and that is the founding principle that we need to hook our reasoning on, right? Sex means something different for all of us. Here are a few examples. For most people, it is just quite simply an expression of intimate love. You know, you have a partner, and it's usually quite exclusive. And one thing you two share is sex, right? For some, like Rose in Titanic, it's an expression of freedom, right? You move away from home, and no more mom and dad telling you what to do. And one of the things I couldn't do when I was at home was have sex, right? And for some people, it's just one of the ways in which they express their freedom. Actually, that's quite similar. For some people, it's completely different. You know, usually people from a very different and particular background, where sex is the only way in which they could earn a living, well, only way they could make ends meet, and it was a job. So that has a very different meaning for this type of person. For this person, I don't know if people into types. Some people, it's a disappointment. Okay, it is, especially here. I remember I grew up in the church, and one thing you're told is to wait until marriage. And it's only when you see what happens afterwards that you realize that so many of the expectations weren't quite met. You know, we waited all this time and saved ourselves for this type of experience. And year after year, and marriage gets hard, and you know, relationships get harder. You know, sex might be one of those things that just disappoints. So when people talk about sex, you sort of see their face going a little bit sad, or they just feel unhappy. Now, when I was in high school, and I don't know whether this has changed, sex was a way of gaining social status. If you had sex when you were in high school, you were sort of more popular, you were more, or was I the only one? No? Okay, good. Yes, I just thought that would be a fun picture. Because I won't admit how much of this I watched, but the bits I watched were, you know, pretty funny. And I remember Regina. Yes, she was the one who had status, right? For some people, sex is that thing that gave them a disease. You know, they made a few mistakes that didn't protect themselves in the ways that they should have, and they have a lifelong disease, and that's what sex meant to them, which was a mistake that led to some people death, and I've seen this myself. Some people, similarly, it was that act that led to an unwanted child. Again, I've seen, you know, a few people like that. You know, you have fun with a partner and didn't quite think about contraception or whatever, or there was a mistake, or it was, you know, and you have this child, and they have that, you know, sex is no longer that thing that it is for many of these other people. You know, it's that thing you don't do unless you either want a child, or it's that thing you need to take absolutely seriously because of you know, reproduction, you know, making new life. And for many people, sex is that one thing that splits families. And I'm talking about infidelity. You know, somewhere along the line, either mommy or daddy cheated on one another, and it split the family, and you went through this horrible experience, and it changed your life as a child, and it usually does. These are quite dramatic episodes. And it happened because of sex, right? Because either mom or dad had sex with someone else, and that changed your life. I actually know one person who, because her father slept with someone else, she has never been in a relationship ever since. And that was from when she was a teenager. She's now in her mid-40s. She's a very lovely woman, but she just decided love was not there because of that. So, there's this word that we're most familiar in terms of how to define what our expectations of sex are. And the word I'm going to use is ideal. So ideal is basically when you go to bed and you want to sleep with someone and you sort of imagine what it's going to be like, what do you think sex is going to be like? And that's usually something in our imagination, that's something we play out. And, you know, it's quite nice. I've put one version of what ideal sex would be for lots of people. I think that's the most acceptable view. In terms that it involves something intimate and sweet and flowy, and I mean the picture just says it all. I'm so good at selecting these things. And then there is a difference between our ideals and what sex actually is like. Okay, and for many people it is quite different, right? We had one laugh. And for many people who haven't quite had a sexual experience yet, there's still an expectation of what it is. And for those people who have had it yet, there's this sort of interplay between these two types of entities. And that's, for example, this is where disappointment might come. You know, I always dreamt that it was going to be like this, but all I get from my partner is this. You know? So there's this distinction between the ideal and reality. This is part of our human sexual experiences, and we need to come to terms with that. We're going to get into consent in a minute, I promise. But this is necessary groundwork. So the question that we all need to ask ourselves are, what do you think your own sex ideal is? And it's actually important to go through this exercise because being honest with yourself will determine why you think you were disappointed or why you think something wasn't for you, etc. We need to know it. So that story, that playful story I made with Titanic all the way to whatever, it took me years for me to understand why perhaps I didn't get what I was unhappy about certain things, or I expected it to be like this and was dealing with disappointments and stuff. I wish someone asked me this question when I was younger, right? So, and I mean, you know, the more particular you are, the more precise you are, you know, the better. How do you like foreplay? How do you like this? How do you like that? What sort of context? What type of person you want it to be with, or etc. You know, you might find older people or younger people. You know, you find people from a particular race sexually attractive, and you know, just making sure you know what you like. And the reason why it's important is because you will be imposing, not imposing, but unintentionally throwing this expectation to your sexual partner, right? So it's important for you to know what it is for you. What do you think? Obviously, this is after you've answered your question. If you actually read this description of, hey, this is how I'd like us to start, you know, this is how I think foreplay should happen, this is how you do it, and maybe after finish whatever you try again, and then, you know, after you've got all that down and you sort of thought through it, it'd be good to actually look at this answer and to judge it. Sometimes it's not what we think. I'm like, gosh, that dirty little, gosh, that shouldn't be, no, I'm really embarrassed about this, or it's a bit too boring. It's good for us to think about our own ideals, as long as they're honest, right? They're still ours, right? So what do you think about your own ideals? Some people might be shocked and think, you know, what if I actually want my partner in my head to do this? That's embarrassing. I'll never actually get to the point where I can ask them to do this, or I'll be a bit too ashamed, or etc. Some people is quite proud. You know, I remember even till today, guys talk about being a climax twice, or you know, this, that, and the other, and you might feel that, you know, part of your sex expectation is achieving some kind of a performance thing, you know, and you might think, yeah, I'm proud of that. I think this is a good expectation. This is a good part of my idea. So these are the sort of answers many people gave. That's from our feedback group we gave this course years ago. Some people feel embarrassed about the ideal. Some people felt proud. Some people felt indifferent, and some people felt ashamed. You know, especially when sexual violence was involved. You know, people actually find pleasure in sexual violence. Again, this is your own ideal. This belongs to you, as long as you're honest about it. Okay. And fourth question has to be asked about our bodies. So that's a huge part of sex, when you sort of get naked before someone else. And part of, for some people, it's an inhibition for sex. You know, they want sex, but they just don't feel brave enough because they're not proud of, or they don't think their bodies were presenting to someone. So it's a very important question to ask. How do you feel about your own body? Right? And guys, you know, we're in the Facebook, Instagram age. In ways that are direct and indirect, we're constantly judging our own bodies through other people, through other images. Right? It's now just a fact of life. So I'll bet almost all of us have an opinion of our own bodies. That's a hypothesis. That'll be right. Here are a few very interesting quotes. Sex is more exciting on the screen and between the pages than between the sheets. Person who was quite old and was quite, I assume, was, you know, sexually very experienced. Here's another quote. This is from an anonymous 13-year-old girl. I hate myself when I look at other girls online posting photos of themselves. It makes me feel really worthless and ugly. I'm struggling to cope with these feelings and stay in my bedroom most of the time. I'm always worrying about what other people are thinking of me. I feel so low. See where this expectation and where this thing about expectation comes into play. It's a huge part of what will turn out to be our sexual experiences. Any questions so far? No? I have sources of my idea. It took me a long time to understand what they were. Certain movies, certain songs, certain porn videos. I wish I knew this by the time I was 18. I could actually identify this. And I think it's a good exercise for most of us to do it. We might not be able to track everything. It doesn't have to be a film, it could be a book, it could be just something I imagine, it could be a content. I had a crush on one or two of my teachers in high school. I can admit that. I don't need a fictional story for me to want to, to have those sort of desires for this person. So if you write down two main sources of your ideal, one of them, I'll bet for almost all of us, is mass information. Right. That's another hypothesis, and I will be pretty sure that I will be right for most people, at least one. Do you trust these sources? We'll get into pornography next week, and the incentives that these sources have in displaying sex as they actually do. That's an important question. The reason why I think it's an important question is because, now we'll deal with that next week. Fiction guides expectation. Again, we'll get into this next week. Basically, a lot of, certainly in my experience, and when I talk intimately with other people, friends and so on about this topic, they can trace many sources back to fiction. That's important to know, guys. And it's just good, honest, reflective work. Happiness and morality. Now we can get into consent. I'm getting a lot of black looks. I'm getting too fast, so I'm like, is this guy just talking complete nonsense? Or maybe we'll leave that until afterwards. Now we can get into the ethics of consent. Now, consent is the notion that invokes ethics. Ethics is the study of what is morally right and wrong. Usually studies actions. Sometimes it studies people. It can have good or bad people. It's mainly actions, good and bad actions. And I'm going to give you two ethical frameworks that can help us determine our sexual actions so that they don't lead to the types of mistakes that include abuse and that cause a lot of happiness. So the first ethical theory is about happiness. Who here wants to be happy? So do I. That's great. There's a theory called utilitarianism. It's the main theory in ethics. It's been around since, when was Bentham? The 18th century. basically says morally good action is one that maximizes the greatest happiness for the greatest number. It's pretty simple. I want to do something and I need to know whether it's right or wrong. Do I tell a lie to mom? Well, it'll cause mom to be upset, so I shouldn't lie. But if I lie and tell her where I am, it'll make her, the girlfriend I'm going to the movie was very happy. So how do I judge this type of happiness? That's another example. Might be a bit too much about my passwords. Happiness is basically, morality is measured by the happiness it produces. It's a consequentialist theory. It doesn't follow principles. No matter what happens, you should never lie. Utilitarianism is what is the consequence? Does it lead to happiness for the greatest number? And we're basically going to apply this to sex and ethics. So a good action, one that maximizes happiness for the most people. This means that there's an assumption here that most people want sex, and I think that's true. Not everyone, but most people do. Why? Because if we had sex, we'd be a little bit happy, right? That means that according to this theory, sex in itself is a morally good thing. It makes us happy. When we're sort of discovering our sexual selves, as we go through puberty and we want this thing, we pursue it, or at least we want to pursue it because it will make us happy. Okay. So that's definition number one. And those philosophers is like, oh gosh, right, start with definitions, we'll never leave this room, but we will. There is a problem with this definition. Can anyone try and tell me what it is? What they think it is? Let's have sex because it's going to make us morally happy. Anyone?
Well, what if one person wants to have sex and thinks I'll increase my happiness and will also increase their happiness of the second person, but the second person doesn't want that in that moment?
There we go. A philosopher, thank you. So it's not as straightforward as I want sex because it's going to make me happy. So the standard cases of sexual abuse that most people are familiar with is you're in a club, you meet someone you're attracted to, it makes you feel kind of horny, and then you just sort of, you just pursue it no matter what happens, right? We sort of put that type of person into this box. They just pursued it because they wanted it, and that's where the story ends. The problem is, in order for sex to be happy, or for sex to make us happy, it has to enact our ideals. And most people who've had sex will tell you this. Yes, let's do it. Not like that, okay? That whole Kate Winslet fruits thing or whatever, I can tell you personally, oh gosh, this is being recorded. Let's put it this way. When sex doesn't enact our ideals, it doesn't lead to that good and happiness that we thought that it did. Okay. So in order for sex to be a morally good thing, it has to enact our ideals. There's another problem. Anyone want to guess what it is?
We don't know each other's ideals.
What about the principle? Sex means something different to everyone. Right. Yes, I'm going to have sex. It's morally good, but it has to be, this conservative and freedom and fruit and all this, etc. Good. All right. Oh yes, you're attractive. You fit this ideal. Whatever. I want to have sex with you. They'll probably run away. Because they probably have a very different idea to what sex is. Right. Yes. There we go. Sex has to enact both our ideals. I'll take that as a straightforward thing. Problem. Let's get someone else apart from Belina. Yeah?
Is there an education problem? So it's not, we don't necessarily know what the other is.
Brilliant. Our ideals are different. There's no one I can find on earth. I mean, if you find anyone, let me know. But there's no one who's going to have that type of idea, or at least when I was 18. Right. We have different ideals. So what do we do about matching? happy sex will almost always, I put almost there in a philosophical term, so it's a philosophical almost, I'm 99% sure that most people will not find someone, a sexual partner who matches their ideals exactly. Right? It will almost always involve a compromise of ideals. Happy sex, people, not just sex. It will involve some kind of compromise. So the basic take home from this, from the utilitarian theory, is maximum sexual happiness means matching two ideals, not one. Which means that when I fancy someone and you go along, whatever flirting route you use, however long or short it takes, you still have to ask what the other person's, well, not ask, it doesn't happen like that, but that's a question you're asking in your head. Is this what the other person might be looking for? Is this also what they want? Am I what they are looking for? Now, it's not a straightforward question, and sometimes it leads to insecurity. But for many people who are perpetrators of sexual assault, that's the question that's missing. And the reason why I'm putting the utilitarian theory is because they are looking for sexual happiness, right? And they don't realize that that is achieved by doing things on the other person's terms as well. So when it comes to matters like consent and rape, or assault and rape and so on, by the way, this course was written in 2019 when there was a huge, 17, 18, when there was a huge spike of sexual assaults at the university I was at. And we got lots of people who were educationists, and they gave talks and inductions, like pretty much like this. And there was a lot of, no means no, and this is how to use protections. That still found its way in there, but it was basically how to read the no means no sign. However, I was in pastoral care, I think we call it, and I saw assaults. I saw them on almost a monthly basis, and I was usually there with the warden, usually a policeman, with the perpetrator. And one of the things that the perpetrator almost always said was, "I didn't know she didn't want this or whatever." Right? And like, these guys know what no means. They're not idiots, right? Maybe they just didn't understand principle. That it wasn't just their sexual happiness that was going to make them happy, that it involved someone else's happiness. So yes, no means no is a huge part of this, but it's not what the problem of consent of this topic is based on. That's why this is where philosophy comes in. We were talking earlier about what impact philosophy has, and sexual happiness starts with understanding. There's so many problems, read contradictions of our time, whether it's political problems or social problems or problems in the university. Oh my goodness, the decisions some universities have made to solve. So I wouldn't even go there. Problems in relationships, they start with problems of understanding. Many of them. Maximum sexual happiness starts with understanding, which is why they're usually best in a relationship. So, folks, aim for happiness, both yourself or the other person. This is the basis of this for me is the answer to the consent, to the problem of sexual assaults. Aim for your happiness, aim for the other person's happiness, and both of you together. It solves the question of abuse. And it's harder than you think, especially in very long-term relationships. When it's a long-term relationship, the sparks aren't there, you begin to see the ugly side of the other person, of yourself. Perhaps you're not as forgiving as you used to be. It's harder. Okay, so question to ask is, what does the other person want? What's different? Differences are a blessing and a curse. There's a lot I personally, there's a lot we can all, our sexual experiences are enriched by the differences of our partners, right? We get to appreciate things that we wouldn't have usually appreciated. I'll get into that in the last few slides. Sometimes it can be a test because, you know, if you're not sexually fulfilled or happy in a certain way, then that sexual unhappiness is something you might have to confront, perhaps with yourself and perhaps with your partner. So this is a question that's very good to ask. State as accurately as you can your partner's idea. And when we did this course with couples, it led to tears, because many did not get it right. And do you think your partner understands and appreciates your own idea? Again, led to tears. This is going to be the most conceptually difficult slide, but it's only one slide, I promise you. It's another ethical theory by another brilliant ethicist called Immanuel Kant. I'm sure you've all heard the name. His ethical theory is the one that most people dislike, the philosophers dislike the most, because it's, well, it captures some things about our ethical intuitions, which says, you know, we can't judge a moral action on its consequences alone. Some things are just plain wrong. Okay, so one of the problems utilitarians face is, right, maximize greatest happiness. Counterexample, you know, like gang rape. You know, well, you've got, you know, 3 perpetrators who are made happy. There's one victim. The balance is, come on, you know, the misery that the victim suffers is completely outweighs the happiness of these people. The utilitarians, fine, add it, just increase the numbers until it outweighs the unhappiness of this person. And that's when someone like Kant says, you miss the point. It's not about numbers. It's not about the happiness of these people. There's some things that are just plain wrong. So he comes up with this theory that's anti-consequentialist. It's called deontology, another fancy word, but you don't need to bother about these things. And he has a formula called the categorical imperative. And there are 3 main maxims in that formula. One of them is you have to treat people as ends in themselves. You cannot use them as means. And and there are many ways of hashing this out. There's 2 types of imperatives in this. So we use people all the time. I use the bus driver, cycle there, but you know, I use a bus driver to I use a shopkeeper to help me. We use people in different ways. But there's an element, one of the helpful ways of thinking about this is that there's an implicit contract of how they allow themselves to be used, right? There's sometimes when you cannot just use people without their consent. So that's the huge part of Immanuel Kant's theory about this is something we call rationality. You know, once you have a human being who has the capability of making decisions on their own, who has a will, they actually possess something that is sacred. That's something that actually many people don't get. You know, for example, Putin doesn't get this right. I don't mean to be too political here, but there are some human beings, many human beings, who don't get the fact that when someone else expresses their will, they're exercising something sacred, something of the humanity that you can't deprive them. And so that if there's a conflict between yours and theirs, you know, you need to take theirs seriously. This means that when you are about to engage sexually with someone, or in all forms of life, you are engaging with someone, something sacred. Take it seriously. When they express their will, you know, it's a serious thing. That wasn't too complicated, was it? Everyone okay? Good, fantastic. So 2 questions here, just keeping an eye on time. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you consider your partner's will and happiness before engaging with them sexually? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does your partner consider your will and happiness before engaging with you sexually? So you can imagine 2 partners doing this. They would give the answers to each other, a few more tears, and that's something to relish, right? And as you can predict, it encounters the partners where both answers were the sort of higher numbers were sexually happy. So steps for the future. How much time do we have? Okay, right. I'll try and be as brief as I can, but I need to get some points home. So now we're going to go into the part where, like, what do I take home from this this course? What do I and I hope you've had a chance to write down some of the questions. There are questions, as I said, you'll be carrying with you as long as you're a sexual human being and you someone pursuing sex with your partner or whatever. They are very, very helpful. Consider your partner as sacred. Two people's happiness is better than one. There's one, I think, I will add in there, which is rejection is a part of sex. It is a reality of sex. Whether you get rejected by that first person you tried to pull on the dance floor or whatever, or whether you've been married to them for 20 years. Sexual rejection is just a part of life. Rejection generally is a part of life, okay? And the reason why that's important is because what I struggled to understand at the beginning when I listened to all these cases of sexual assault when I was in pastoral care was, okay, so, she said no. Someone else is going to say yes, There's someone out there. People want sex, right? It didn't happen with this person at that time. You'll be fine. You just, play your game a little bit better. I couldn't quite say this, but know, or even with your, when you're in relationships, for all sorts of reasons, and it happens frequently. Hey, I'm not in the mood today, baby, or something's happening, or whatever. And it can happen once, it happens twice, 3 times, it can happen for a week. If it goes longer than that, then we'll be like, okay, fine. Part of my sexual ideal is we do this a little bit more often. But sexual rejection is just a part of sex. And it can be for the best reason. It could be that the other person doesn't want to have sex with you, right? That's thing. It could be that the other person just doesn't like you, right? It could be that the other person likes you and finds you attractive and wants to have sex with you, but maybe not now, for whatever reason. There's a whole range of reasons why people will say no at that particular time. It's not the end of the world. And if it's a definite no from that person, there'll be someone out there in the world, who would like to say yes. To actually take that step into breaking someone else's will is something that really, really doesn't need to happen if what you want to say. I'll add that into the slide, I think. Should I add it into the slide? Is it worth? Gender differences. These are generalizations, people. These are huge generalizations, but they're helpful guides. They're helpful guides about how to navigate this confusion that leads to some mistakes when it comes to consent. Can anyone explain this joke to me? Men reach their sexual peaks at 18, women reach theirs at 35. Do you think God is good? So I read it as, men don't really know how to, women basically have to wait until they find someone who knows how to please them, and men can do it easy. Is that the right reading of this? Yeah, you think, okay, yeah, that's how I take it. There you go. The reason these questions are important is because the stories that I heard in my cases, these were questions that people didn't ask. What turns the opposite sex on, and how quickly can they get turned on? One of the biggest bits of wisdom I got about sex growing up was actually from my mother. She knew I was growing up. She knew that I was thinking about something, and she told me, Syano, men are like switches and women are like irons. One gets turned on in a switch, and the other needs a little bit of heating up. And this made perfect sense to me because once you're, and many people have been there. Again, remember a generalization, but when I listened to some of the cases that I was doing, someone would get a girl, say, yeah, okay, fine, let's go for a drink, okay, fine, let's go to your bedroom or whatever. And you get to the bedroom, and for the guy, it'd be like, that's it, she said yes to everything. But many times you'd be like, hey, I kind of like you, I kind of want you, just for now, this is as far as I want to go. And he just couldn't understand it, right? Because the switch is already on, right? And there's no real in between, right? These are generalizations again. So the generalization is that it's quite easy to get a guy desirous for sex, and a girl will start off being interested and taking one step after another, and will be led a little bit more curiously. That's a generalization. But it's a generalization that I wish some perpetrators understood. Okay. Anatomy. When I first gave this course to people in the National Systems of Service, I asked a lot of the guys, I said, right, imagine you don't have a penis, right? What do you do for the first half hour of sex? And the answers were from, well, there's you talk to her and whatever, all the way to, well, go and get a sandwich and come back when she's ready. I'm not kidding, right? Understanding your partner's sexual anatomy, especially for most people who are heterosexual, is quite important, because I realized, I'm a man, I've got one thing, usually one thing to do with it. It can start and finish in about 3 minutes, and that's it. It's hardly the stuff of poetry, okay? That means that if that was what made me happy, whatever, making my sexual partner who's a woman happy, I would disappoint her. There's so many other things to do. I wouldn't get a little bit graphic here, but I think most of us get the point. Understanding that the other person has different sexual anatomy, and again, that's a generalization. Then there are personal differences. Become a learner of your partner and of yourself. Sometimes and this usually happens in long-term relationships, you're not always usually aware of what turns you on or what turns the other person on. And so sometimes pretty well within your rights to say, hey, you tried this, I can tell you, but having a good time, but it's I want to know. I want to know what makes you happy. Trial and error, communication, it's both implicit and explicit. There's a huge assumption in these, which is that this is in a long-term sexual relationship. In shorter term sexual relationship, one night stands and stuff, this usually doesn't happen, and the bar is quite low. You go there, bang each other out, and then but here you sort of, in a relationship, you sort of learn a little bit from each other. Sexual politics. Be fair and be nice. This happens a lot because sex becomes one of those things that is part of couples negotiations. Oh my gosh, you didn't say anything about how I dressed yesterday for dinner, or you didn't do this that way, so of course I'm not going to be in the mood to sleep with you tonight. Fine, well within your rights. It could be another example of, I hate the way you never defend me in front of your mom or your dad or whatever, and because you never do it, you gotta face up to them, or I'm going cold on you for a few weeks, right? It happens. Sex becomes a political tool in your relationship. A little bit of advice: talk about these things, be fair and be nice. Changing ideals. Ideals differ with context. For some people, an ideal could be as simple as, I needed to be this person with the same religion or from this particular background. Or it could be the whole Kate Winslet thing all the way to, it could be a little bit more detailed. It has to be in marriage or whatever. Ideals will differ, and remember that they would involve compromise. This is one of the beautiful things I find about sex in relationships. It's something nice about giving and taking, changing a little bit of your ideal. I think I mentioned the idea of long-termism. This usually happens when you're in something a little bit longer term, and that some change is necessary for both of you to reach that sort of sweet spot of sexual happiness. What in your ideal are you unwilling to change? There's some people going to say, right, this person is, I'm only going to marry someone I'm married to. This person wants to, have sex before, and this is what I'm not changing. Or there's a certain type of sex, something physically that I don't know, if I'm painful, whatever. I'm not doing that. It could be anything, right? This is another question to ask yourself when you actually get there. What in your partner's ideal would you wish them to change? That's another discussion to have. And of course, as part of the Think Citizen program, project, mission, always be skeptical about what you're watching. And we will deal with this next week. I think I will be around for questions afterwards, but as far as the course is concerned, that's me done. Thank you.